So Summit Initiative started, it's hard to tell exactly when it started because really all it is the story of God revealing himself to me in my life. And so, I would say it ramped up probably 5 years ago. It was kind of like the progression of it, but it really started in 2012. And there's a story that we tell in the training where my wife and I, Stephanie, have a home group over our house. And, for the home groups, people would come over, we would eat. This is what you do, right? When you get together as a church, you get together, you eat, we talk about the sermon, and then we break off guys and gals, and we kind of go deeper into the sermon content and into accountability and things like that. So we have this group coming over our house, about 20 people, and the sermon topic that day or that week happened to be about abuse. And so it's a very, very sensitive subject, one that most guys don't want to talk about. And so we split off, guys and gals, after we've eaten. I'm in the basement with a group of friends of mine, and we don't know how to enter into this conversation at all. And so I clumsily, just because I don't know what I'm doing, say, who has abuse, who has sexual abuse that they want to talk about? Crickets. No, nobody says anything. And so I'm sitting there and I have this moment where I'm, in a sense, wrestling with God, because the reality is that that's part of my story. But I don't want to share with these guys, much like they don't want to share with me. And I know, statistically speaking, 1 out of every 7 guys has experienced some sort of sexual abuse by the time that they're 18. And I'm looking around the room thinking, I must be the only one here. God had a different story. He had a different plan. So he invites me into trust. Jason, would you trust me with this part of your life? Oh Lord, I don't want to talk about that. I have put those memories in a drawer, and I've locked that drawer, and I don't ever want to open it again. Nobody knows these stories. God, my wife knows that something happened, but she doesn't know these stories. And again, in his faithfulness and his goodness, he goes, would you trust me with that? Now I have a decision to make. Am I going to trust God? And am I going to relive these moments of my life that I've wanted to forget for 25 to 30 years? And so I proceed to tell the story of a 7 and 8-year-old kid who's gone through a season of abuse in his life. And he was ugly, man. I did not know how to tell that story. And I'm a mess. I'm just bawling. It's like ugly crying, like legit ugly crying. The shame came back. The embarrassment came back. And it felt very weighty. And as I look up after the story, I start to see that my friends, they're all emotional as well. And I was a little bit confused at first. And one by one, they proceed to share their stories. The vast majority having experienced something of the same. That was that moment where I realized this is what God is in the business of doing. He's in the business of taking the junk of our life, and as we trust him with it, uses it to plant seeds of hope and healing, not just in me, but in those around me. To the point where we can, I've had someone ask me before, if you could go back, if you could stop that stuff from happening. And there was a lot more of brokenness in my life, right? That's just one story. But if you could go back and you could talk to 7-year-old Jason and go, hey buddy, don't go over there. Hey buddy, just go play in the backyard with your brothers and your sister. Hey, just go, practice some pitching because you're gonna need it, right? If I could go back and stop Jason from going through that, knowing now what God has done with it, man, I don't think I would. And that's not of this world. That is God's work in my life and in my heart and in the hearts of the friends that I have and the hundreds of people and thousands of people at this point that we've been able to share with our brokenness with, over the years as we engage in this ministry. God is in the business of taking the worst that this world has to offer and turning it up on its head and creating life and hope. Man, that's something It's not just something I would give, like I would want to spend my life doing. It's something I would give my life for. And that's different. After I told the story to those guys, not a lot changed in my life for a while. I mean, I was sensitive, I was raw for a while, and I was able to go to my wife and tell her the story. And then for her to validate me in my brokenness, right? And so, but there was this slow incremental changes over years of time. But there was these moments in life where God will show up, seemingly unexpected, and go, will you trust me? And it's usually, for me at least, a delayed response. Like, yeah, I trust you. And he's like, okay, well then, would you do this thing? And one of those things he asked me to do was step away from a corporate, well-paying job to go and be a pastor at a church. And I did that. And again, that was great. It was a wonderful season, and God did a lot of things through that. But now I find myself in ministry, dealing with people and working with people and their hurts and brokenness, way different than when I was selling money at a bank, right? And so now I'm in the ministry and just, in a sense, really drowning at that point, just going, I don't really know what I'm doing. And there came, a moment where out of my own strength, I tried to make things happen. And it seemed to me that it was failing. And so I find myself going back to the bank. This is all over a 3 to 5 year period. I go back to the bank. And God in his goodness shows up and says, what are you doing here? I never told you to go back to the bank. But God, I was reading all the signs, and it seemed to me that this is what you want to do. And he's going, what are you doing here, man? Like, I never told you to come back. It actually, what it felt like was, and I get emotional about this because it felt, and I don't want to liken myself to like a biblical character, but really it felt like Peter, I guess how I would say it is, I can relate to Peter as he goes back to fishing. God calls Peter, Jesus calls Peter into something where he thinks, oh, okay, like we're going to take over, like we're going to be the rulers. And then it didn't turn out the way he thought. And so in his confusion and in his frustration, his response is, I guess I'll just go back to fishing. So I went back to fishing. I found myself at the bank again. And God shows up, says, what are you doing here? And during that season, started to develop some health issues that kind of came out of nowhere. I was in really good shape. I was climbing mountains. We were doing CrossFit, 3 or 4 times a week. And it was the best shape of my life, honestly. And something had happened during a workout where all of a sudden I felt like I was having a heart attack. Now, part of my family origin story is that my father had a heart attack at 41 years old. And I was about 40, 41 at that time. Now, he survived it. But I thought in that moment, I must be doomed to the same fate. I must be having a heart attack. And if it's not going to happen now, it's going to happen pretty soon. Now, I'm a pretty logical guy. I'm an emotional guy, don't get me wrong, but I'm also very logical. Like, let's not, beat around the bush. If this is the way that I'm going to go, then let's get set up for it. Let's set the family up for success. So I'm working at the bank, I'm having these heart issues. There's moments where I'm like almost passing out in my car as I'm driving because blood's not effectively pumping through my body correctly. The doctors can't really figure out what's going on. And so they was just kind of reaching for straws, and you're going like, hey, you need to stop drinking so much coffee. I'm like, okay, I'll stop drinking coffee. So I go 4 months without drinking no caffeine, right? Or sugar. And it's still doing it. In fact, it gets worse. So maybe I need to drink more coffee. Like, what is going on here? And all the while, God's going, what are you doing here? I never told you to come back. And so this begins a season of wrestling for me, where I go, look, if you're going to take me, just take me. And it's not going to be good for my family. But I trust that you're good, even if that happens. So if that's going to happen, then I want to leave. I want to leave my children If that's going to happen, I want to leave my children with stories. And so I started to write. Any story I could come up with. I got 20 pages of just notes on, like, there's this story, and then there's this story, and then there's this story. But I tried to pick out the stories that weren't about me. There's stories that were about God's work. Like, what was God doing? Because I wanted them to have stories about their dad. I wanted them to know their dad. But more than that, I wanted them to trust God. And my fear was that, Levi, Seth, and Addie were going to question God's goodness. That's the way the enemy was going to attack them. And as best I could do from the other side of the grave, I wanted to leave them with some sort of hope. And so that's what kicked off the story section of this. I went deep dive, man. Deep dive into my story. And wrote hundreds of pages of just story. And then initially they were stories about me, right? Like, there's this funny story about dad being dumb and almost dying and just being stupid. Like, don't do this, that kind of stuff. And then there were stories about, well, here's like some of these, small adventures that we went on as kids. And then all of a sudden, you started to see the themes of this epic adventure that got drawn out. And I started to go, whoa, dude, look what God has done. And you started to see the thread of adventure and wonder that he was drawing, and risk that he was drawing through my life. And then you started to see the ways that I had lost that heartbeat and I was trying to get it back out of my own strength. And then I get caught up in doing men's weekends with some friends from church. And if you know me, you know that I am not a men's weekend guy. But God had me there for a reason. He was starting to do the heart surgery on me. And so I'm at the bank. In fact, I think I don't know where I was at in the storyline, but I'm in the middle of this wrestling in this heart issue, and I'm at this men's weekend. And God legit starts doing heart surgery on me, like in a very spiritual sense. He started to show me my disobedience. Started to lead me into forgiveness. I come face to face with my failure that I thought was failure. But then all of a sudden, God starts to redefine that. And these deep fears that I have, these themes of, I don't have what it takes. These lies that I believe that I'm not good enough, man. Like, it's just a matter of time before everybody realizes it, right? These are the tapes that are playing over my head. And I've got evidence to suggest that it's true. And the guy goes, that's not what I said about you, dude. That's not what I said about Jason. And in his goodness rescues me. It starts the rescue process, which then starts to inform this story stuff. And so I find myself at a bank, I have a heart issue, and God's going, would you walk away from this? And we talk a little bit about this escalating trust that God draws us deeper into. It starts off with, will you trust me with your story back in 2012? And then it starts to, like, now will you walk away from your career to go to a job that you know and are aware of? 2, hey, would you walk away from this career thinking that you're going to die? Would you walk away from your health insurance? Would you walk away from your life insurance? And I'm going, where do I go? And he goes, nowhere. What? And talk about struggling with failure. Like, dude, everybody's going to think I'm a loser. Everybody's going to think I'm a failure, right? I'm like, this is borderline not taking care of my family, God. Like, are you kidding me? Would you trust me, Jason? But you're asking me to walk away from life insurance right before you're about to kill me. And there's a pretty sweet policy at the bank. So at least my family would be taken care of if I kick the bucket while I'm at the bank. Jason, would you trust me? So we walk away with Stephanie's permission. And 3 days later, the hard stuff goes away. Just like that. Then he's drawn me deeper into a training season of life, a prep season, a pruning season. And he starts to prune and cut away. And initially it felt like he was pruning and cutting away because I did something wrong, right? Like, dude, this discipline is rough, God. That's what it felt like. And then through other pastors and through books and messages, he starts to show me that, hey, this is not discipline, this is pruning. God prunes because he wants to bear more fruit. And now, through Summit, is the arm in which he's starting to show the fruit that he wants to bear, not just through me, but through my friends and the ones that I get to walk with on a regular basis, and the people I get to train and speak life and truth into. God cares a lot about his kids. We get to participate in that rescue plan. And I'll say this till the day that I die. Man, adventure and wonder is a wonderful thing, and it costs everything. If you're going to trust God, it's going to cost. It's going to cost. But it's worth every penny. And I would never trade it for the world. The fruit of Summit has been souls in God's kingdom. There was this song that we used to sing when I was a kid at church, and one of the lyrics in it was, your gospel, O Lord, is the hope of our nation. It's the power of God for our salvation. It says, we ask not for riches, but look to the cross. And for our inheritance. And for our inheritance, give us the lost. I have stories upon stories of people who may not be here today. Had it not been God's intervention in their lives as a result of what we get to do through Summit. And those are soldiers, and they're church people, and they're pastors, and they're homeless kids. Like, it's everybody. So we talk about the fruit of what God is doing. It's not riches for us. Like, that's not what this is about. It's not fame. It's not power. It's not whatever the trappings are of this world. It's about our inheritance being God is meeting people and changing their hearts and saving their lives. And we get to play that role. And my hope someday is that at the end of all this, we get to look back and see and celebrate all that God has done. Which started as a simple moment of God going, would you trust me? It started as a simple moment of God, Jason, would you trust me? And I didn't know if I could. But man, it's like, talk about the mustard seed metaphor, right? Like, dude, that was, in my mind, a stupid little mustard seed moment that God was like, hey, would you just tell the story to people in this room? And it has blossomed into this tree that he has nurtured and pruned and grew. And there are going to be people in his kingdom as a result of that. And there are already people in his kingdom as a result of that. I don't know what the next 40 years looks like, man. But I sure do know that he's going to keep doing what he's doing. Nobody's going to stop him from doing that. And nobody's going to get in the way, not even me. And that's what I'm grateful for. That's the fruit that we get to see. Yeah.
Took me away from